Ladies and gentlemen, let's come to our last session at ITB Future Day, the blockchain. The blockchain technology has the potential to revolutionize companies and the entire economy. Over $1 billion have been invested already in blockchain research and development. Despite the hype surrounding blockchain, only few people have a detailed understanding of its main principles. How exactly does blockchain work, and what effects will it have on global travel industry structures? What have tourism industry pioneers been experiencing with blockchain, and which steps should companies now take? Before we start our panel discussion, ladies and gentlemen, please once again do our live voting. We have a live voting system installed in this hall here. You have remote control devices attached to your seats, and you can give answers to the question I'm now raising. So please take the devices and answer or give answers to the following question. Can we have the live voting question, please? Do you know how blockchain works and what applications are possible in tourism? If you say no, I have no idea, then press 1, please. If you say I have somewhat of an idea, please press 2. And if you say yes, I do, then please press 3. Ladies and gentlemen, please vote now. Okay, the majority says I have somewhat of an idea, and there are 1/3 who say no, I have no idea. So there is only a little bit knowledge in the audience for 1/3. So please do not talk too complicated, no computer science technology in depth, please. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator of this session now is Norm Rose. He's the president of Travel Tech Consulting Incorporated. Norm is a world renowned for his travel technology expertise, particularly his analysis on the impact of emerging trends such as mobile, social media, blockchain, and artificial intelligence. He started his career at United Airlines and Sun Microsystems, and in 1995, Norm founded Travel Tech Consulting with a clear mission to track emerging technologies and interpret their impact on the global travel industry, to help clients create strategies to manage a changing technology-driven reality. Norm, please come on stage, introduce our 3 panel guests, please. Welcome. First, you do your presentation now. Yeah.
To first presentation. Yeah. It should be there. So blockchain. Blockchain is the most revolutionary technology to arrive in decades. Will change every industry, especially the travel industry. Blockchain is the most overhyped technology to come along since maybe transporters, and will have no effect and will take at least 20 years. So maybe everyone's grandchildren will address it. Well, those 2 statements is what you hear. And generally, when it comes to emerging technologies, the truth is actually somewhere in the middle. So when we talk about what is blockchain, we often get somewhat focused on this, the faucet. Now, what do I mean by the faucet? The faucet is the front end. So one of the first things that people say is, well, how is the consumer going to use blockchain? How's my travel agency going to use blockchain? How's my tour operator going to use blockchain? In reality, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the plumbing. We're talking about the infrastructure. Not very sexy, but let's face it, the infrastructure in the travel industry is prime for change. So a couple of terms here, just so that you, for those 30% who are not clear on this at all, or those who do think they understand, there's a couple of terms out there that you're probably very familiar with, and one is Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin was introduced during a very tough time in the world. It was during the financial crisis, and it's become the most widely adopted currency, but also has been associated with buying illegal drugs and other things like that. Whether you believe Bitcoin is good or not, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about blockchain. Blockchain is the distributed ledger technology that came along with Bitcoin. It was described by the creators of Bitcoin and is really a separate subject. And then we have Ethereum. Ethereum is a little bit different when it comes to a digital currency because it basically has introduced things like smart contracts and was built really to enable other technologies to be built on top of it. So it's a development platform. But the basic idea is centralized versus decentralized. So the idea of a peer-to-peer network. Has anyone ever used a peer-to-peer network? Raise your hand. Okay. And has anyone ever used Skype? Everyone's used a peer-to-peer network. It's been around for a while. It basically connects a person to a person rather than going through intermediary. The other thing, though, is where information is stored. So information, historically, is stored in a single place. We've had some problems with that. We've had information attacked at that central place. We've had exposure. The difference here with blockchain is a copy of that ledger, that record of who is buying something and who is selling something and how much they paid for it, exists on every single node of the network, which means that if one of those nodes differs from the other, it's caught immediately. And that's one of the benefits here. There also is a lot of encryption involved with blockchain. There's public, there's private, there's hash. There's an example of a block. Tells you a lot, right? Lots of code. The only thing we know has something to do with Iceland. But that's what happens when you have even a public blockchain. It's highly encrypted. And then we look at steps in the blockchain. It's very simple. A blockchain, basically, someone wants to buy something from someone else. A block is represented. It's broadcast to miners on a network. And I'll explain what a miner is in a moment. Then the miner verifies that transaction. It's added to the block. It gets settled. It's as simple as that. You now are experts on blockchain. Obviously, it's a lot more complex than that, but in a simplistic way, that's the gist of it. And the role of the miner is very important, because the miner itself is really someone who's created a computer application that looks to solve a cryptographic or a mathematical puzzle. And it verifies the legitimacy of the transaction, and then they're compensated generally in digital currencies. Those that were early miners for Bitcoin are pretty wealthy right now. Now, the idea of a smart contract also is a fairly simplistic thing. Agreement is reached, a smart contract is created on the blockchain, and then it triggers an event. But just think about it. Think how many contracts you are involved with with your business. And imagine if the transaction, once you reached a certain revenue goal or whatever the contract was done automatically, programmatically by the system. And then there's the concept of permission versus permissionless blockchains. In a permission-based blockchain, there is no anonymity here. Users are not anonymous. Permission is required for users to have a copy of the ledger and basically participate in the confirming of the transactions. Versus a public blockchain is users are anonymous. Each user has a copy of the ledger and participates in the confirming of the transactions. The difference here is maintaining control by the middleman versus eliminating the middleman. And that's probably the rhetoric you've heard the most about blockchain. It's going to eliminate the middleman. And the thing to understand, though, is that this is fairly young technology. Now, unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the beginning of the internet. And when I used to talk to people around the internet around the late 80s or early 90s, they had trouble getting it. And the reality is the internet is a lot different today than it was back then. And so will blockchain. So some of the issues around blockchain concern speed, which you look at Bitcoin about 3 to 4 transactions per second, Ethereum about 20 versus credit cards, 2,000 transactions per second. But there are different forces, whether it's the Lightning Network on Bitcoin or the Plasma initiative on Ethereum, that are looking to improve this speed. There's also some concern about public transactions and whether or not having an open network is the way to go. And then there's the volatility. You probably are aware that the price of all the cryptocurrencies have gone through a roller coaster ride, really being high near the end of last year and then taking a big dip. So people are concerned about that. So where are some of the areas that we're going to be seeing blockchain? Number one is perhaps transparency. Having contracts initiated and the fact that everything, the price of the hotel room, has been recorded on the blockchain and cannot be changed. It's immutable, cannot be changed. Therefore, transparency is a lot fuller there. I think the number one thing that we'll see initially is settlement. Cross-border settlement can be made. Think about the time it takes everyone in this room to get paid. If we can speed that up through blockchain, we're going to see adoption. Loyalty, there's been an initiative by Singapore Airlines to use blockchain and allow the owners of the points for Singapore to use that as transactions to buy goods and services through blockchain. Fraud continues to be a major problem for our industry, and we're going to see some changes, especially since we have that. So there's still going to be bad actors out there that will find ways, as we've seen Bitcoin being stolen from wallets, but fraud is definitely a benefit. Identity, there's a known traveler initiative that the Global Economic Forum is initiating along with a number of companies, some within travel, some within high tech, to try to have a common identity across the whole travel chain. The way of gathering information from the Internet of Things, that's the ability to look at information from all the sensors we have out in the environment and record that. Perhaps even a solution for overbooking. And then there's a whole corporate travel side where there could be help with compliance, with the usage of contracted rates. But we hear about eliminating the middleman, and there's lots of middlemen, and you may be sitting here and going, well, wait a second, I'm a middleman. I don't want to be eliminated. Well, I don't think this is going to happen overnight. And I think what really happens when we talk about eliminating the middleman is that the middleman changes roles. So if you think about what your telephone company did 25 years ago versus what they do today, they have a little different role. The fact that so many people have used Skype is evidence that there is a different way to communicate. And that changing role is there. And we still need customer interfaces in order to complete this process. Lots of examples of blockchain out there. I won't go through each of these, but we have some representatives here today that will talk about it. But ultimately, some of these are private blockchains. I think a few may be public. As well as a representative from Winding Tree, who, full disclosure, I am an advisor to Winding Tree, who's doing a permissionless token and did a token event earlier this year and raised some funds from that. So here's what I want you to remember, because one thing that I've learned of all the public speaking I've done over the last 25 years is that people don't remember stuff I say. So here's what I'd like you to remember. It's the plumbing. It's the plumbing. We're talking about the infrastructure changing. We're talking about a distributed network, something that's distributed across multiple computers. And the last thing is that we're hoping that we're going to get a lot of third-party developers on board to help build this next generation platform for travel. And that's what happened with Linux. Linux is an open source operating system, which if you go back to your companies, you look at big data centers, you'll find Linux almost universally in those data centers. All right, well, let's move to our panel. Hopefully that was a little bit of an introduction. I would like to introduce our panel now. We have some distinguished folks to join us. First of all, Maksim Izmaylov, who's the founder and CEO of Winding Tree. There. Great. Frank Rosenberger, who's a member of the executive board, IT and new markets for TUI Group. And Decius Valmorbida, who is the Senior Vice President, Travel Channels at the Amadeus IT Group. Thank you, gentlemen. So we do need some women up here next time, I think. All guys here. It's not just for men. So if you can just start off in your own words, we'll start with you, Max. What do you think about blockchain? How are you applying blockchain to your business, and why did you decide to go that route, and how are you applying it, and what's the value?
Right. So you gave this example of plumbing, right? I would go even further, and I would say it's not the plumbing that blockchain provides. It's the blueprint for that, and any one of you can take that blueprint and you can connect your own plumbing and you can build your own faucets on top of that network. And so I think about innovation, particularly in the industry that's related to computers, in the IT industry. I think about 3 waves that happened over the course of the last 60 or so years, right? So the first wave happened with the invention of the computer. The first computer was ENIAC, that's, known, ENIAC is known as the first computer. And it's key, the key to understanding that first wave of innovation is that the computer was never patented. If it was, we would be in a completely different reality today. There was actually a very long, 20-year-long legal battle for patenting the computer, and there were a couple of people that wanted to patent that technology. They failed, and it's a good thing. So the second wave happened when Tim Berners-Lee invented the internet, the HTTP protocol. And again, CERN, that is the European Organization for Nuclear Research, they could have owned that invention. They could have owned that technology, but they said very explicitly, no, we're not going to own that technology. Anyone, anywhere in the world who owns a computer, who has a computer, can play with that technology, improve on top of that, et cetera, et cetera. And the third wave that is happening right now is blockchains, right? And Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous inventor of Bitcoin, he did exactly that. He released the Bitcoin software and all the ideas, the cryptographical proofs that transactions are valid. There are many technologies that are used in Bitcoin, not just one, not just blockchain. And again, all those technologies were never patented. It's out in the open, and that allows a vibrant community of developers all around the world to build on top of that. Ethereum, for example, would not be possible if Bitcoin was patented or owned by someone. So we would be completely in a different reality today if that technology was owned by some company. So to me, there are many, many important points in the blockchain technology. But I think you gave a really good explanation about what it is. It's plumbing, it's the blueprint for that plumbing, et cetera, et cetera. So at Winding Tree, what we want to do, and you gave that example of a phone company 30 years ago or 25 years ago. So imagine 30 years ago you had only one choice, right? You had to go, when you pick up the phone at your apartment, the rotary phone, you dial a number, and you call from New York to London, you didn't have a choice. You only were using one company. That's your phone company by default. You got the bill at the end of the month, and that's it. Because we have this open technologies, the computer, the internet, now the blockchain, many developers around the world, people who invented Skype, Google Hangouts, Zoom, how many apps I have on my screen, on my phone screen, just to call people around the world for free, because of those open technologies that were available, and because people were able to play with them, iterate very quickly, and innovate. So that's something what we do for the travel industry as well. We do know, everyone knows here, that there are a few monopolies in the travel industry, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a completely open network. We're a nonprofit foundation, and we're creating this open network where everyone and anyone can connect to innovate, develop new things, you don't need to ask permission. And what we want to enable in the travel industry is permissionless innovation.
Okay. That was a long answer.
Sorry.
So the question, Frank, just to refresh your memory, is what's your view of blockchain? How are you using it at TUI?
Yeah, sure. I think our starting point was a little bit different. So we hadn't been too excited about the plumbing. Yeah. It was more that we thought about, we are of course continuously watching kind of new technologies. And I think when you talk about, I would say, disruption in travel, when we go back, so what are the kind of the key disruptions which we see as TUI in the past? Of course, on the one side, it's something like low-cost carriers. Yeah, that was a significant disruption to package travel. And on the other side, of course, a way of how, and I think you mentioned that, Maksim, in terms of how the internet has actually created some kind of very, very big players in the industry which we hadn't had seen there before. And so therefore we are constantly on the watch to say, well, is there something which actually might change our industry again, and what might be actually the impact? And I think one of the fundamental problems of the internet is typically the kind of the anonymity of the players. Yeah? So therefore, if you're a buyer, you potentially don't know the seller. Yeah, and if you're a seller, you don't know if the buyer exists. So therefore, if you want to exchange goods, and even if the goods is, for example, the access or the permission towards a room, and there is this kind of very big question. And therefore, this has actually driven to have some of these very powerful intermediaries. And when we then looked into a blockchain, we actually saw, given to the nature of the technology you explained very nicely, Norm, so that there is potentially an opportunity to overcome this kind of fundamental problem. And then at the point where one of the developer communities, which Maksim described, precisely the Ethereum Foundation created smart contracts, then actually it rang the bell with us to say, well, what do we really have? What do we really do in travel that's actually bringing people together? Yeah, that's bringing people together, helping them actually to close contracts. And so therefore we saw, well, let's analyze this technology and try to better understand and to understand very, very early for TUI in terms of what can it mean for us. And I think over the last 1.5, 2 years, I think we have spoken to almost everyone who does anything in blockchain, yeah, including Maksim. So I think we had a lot of good conversations, actually. And so we thought about, in terms of what can we do in TUI in terms of understanding truly the kind of the potential which is in. And I think one of the problems we had, because we are kind of a company consisting of different kind of local markets in the UK, in Germany, and they all had their own purchasing, yeah, and they had their own contracting with hotels. So therefore, at the end of the day, you could understand that there might be a kind of a situation where actually two markets have commitments in hotels. However, that there is arbitrage between these different markets because, for example, seasonality might be different, and also, for example, the yields towards certain destinations might be different. So what we then thought, well, so let's think about in terms of how can we create a system which on the one side still allows a kind of the, and supports the independence and the P&L of these different markets which we are running, but on the other side to give actually some kind of transparency across the inventory which we are running at TUI. And so we actually used the underlying technology, but we applied a very concrete use case in terms of bringing our contracts to that platform and helping to analyze us perfectly in terms of understanding what is our yield situation, what are arbitrage opportunities, and being able to actually then create some kind of arbitrage between markets for the benefit of customers. Because at the end of the day, it means when, for example, there's high season in Germany, and for example, our contingents are exhausted, but we still have remaining rooms in the UK, that we can actually easily now move using the smart contracts, rooms from one market to another, making additional rooms available, and then actually we can go ahead with selling. That was the idea. That's what we did as a kind of a first step, and we started last year, and since then we are operational with that stuff.
Great, thank you.
So, hello everyone, I'm Decius. Maybe first 1 minute just explain what I do in Amadeus. Amadeus is a big company, so I'm responsible for the GDS globally. So typically when they ask me about blockchain, I get questions. The first one is, how would that affect our customers? So travel agencies, tour operators. So we have heard let's say, very big statement. Blockchain has the possibility of disrupting the middleman, and therefore they ask, then would there be agencies in the future? Can we, just like the internet at the time that was going, is this a discussion that consumers are going to be able to talk to providers directly? So that's one question that we get. Second question that we get, that is an easy answer, which is agencies will be there because you provide much more service than technology. So that is not a difficult one. Then a more difficult one comes to ourselves as travel tech, because then they ask, okay, but then could either a new player emerge using blockchain and disrupt you, or could blockchain eliminate the need for a GDS itself? No? So then we need to explain what we do. So it is not really, our value is less on just being the open ledger, and our value is much more about integrating and doing all of the transactional processes around 400,000 points of sale, thousands of providers. So it is more of us, we look at blockchain more a technology that we can use rather than something that will replace what we do in our mission. And then the last question is, okay, but then this is a new technology that is showing up. What new problems, what existing problems in the value chain could blockchain come and resolve? And can then Amadeus be a user, a heavy user of blockchain technology to bring new products to the market? And then that's where we are with our first ideas and our first concepts and use cases about bringing what could elements of the industry we believe that by using blockchain we could solve, and that we are interested as first concepts. So that's my introduction for the blockchain.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for that. So I want to drill down on the issue of the middleman a little bit more, because again, it ends up being a nice talking point to get people's attention. But I was wondering if you could each talk a little bit about how you think the role of the middleman, and specifically, travel agencies, tour operators, destination management companies, anyone who acts as both a seller or as a wholesaler, how their life will be changed, and then when do you think it will be changed? Because that's really the bottom line here, is how soon will this happen? And I'll open up for anyone who wants to start.
I can start, yeah. So I think when we talk about travel agencies, when we talk about online distribution, when we talk about hoteliers or other kind of content activity owners, I don't think that when we talk about them, we are talking about middlemen. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about these are the people, these are the services towards the edge of towards the customer, towards our holiday maker, towards our Urlauber. And I think these roles, they will actually continue to exist. And when we talk about blockchain, when we think about blockchain, we say, well, how can we actually enrich these roles beyond of what we do today? How can we give actually more access to content? How can we give more access to hotels? How can we make it much more easier for our travel agencies, for example, to identify when they have created a package for their customers? So what are potentially additional activities? And how can we make them accessible to them on the one side, in a smart and clever way, and how we can make it much more easy than today, so that they can create together with their clients a kind of a proper contract between the customer on the one side and the provider of the ancillary or the extra at the other day. And to do that in a way that they don't need to worry about, will that at the end of the day really happen? And I think, I know that today there is a lot of stress in terms of, will these kind of activities really take place at the end of the day as I have imagined that, or I want, or the customer wanted that? And I think by moving toward this direction, we can have, I think also the distributed nature of that platform will make much easier for all these kind of content providers across the world, actually to become part of a kind of a more global platform for travel. And I think that's something we should work on.
Look, from our side, I mean, Frank just mentioned, no? So first of all, we feel that agencies are there for comparison, for servicing, for neutrality. So there is a number of values that are on top of what would be just simply processing the transaction. So, those are not going away. So I think that is very clear. From our side, being a technology provider, what we try to do is bring economies of scale on the investments that are required in technology. So we can always think about a future that we have individual players all making their own investment, and we have us as the possibility for players to be outsourcing those IT decisions to us. And then on behalf of providers and on behalf of agencies, we're creating a single IT environment that everyone can participate and can do business with. And then from our point of view, the same way as we just went through moving from mainframe to Linux, and now we have a full open system environment, and we have to adopt many technologies, then for us, blockchain, it is another technology that we believe is going to come in our tool set. We believe there are certain functions, the fact that it is very secure, the fact that it doesn't have a single point of failure, the fact that the technology brings the possibility of collaboration. So we feel we believe there are interesting items that the technology brings to the table that we're going to be able to solve new problems. And whenever market is mature and there is enough adoption, I think it will be normal that, you know, we're not even going to see it, no, because we're going to be talking about the faucet and not anymore about the plumbing. Yep. So we believe there is going to be an element that very naturally will be part of the toolbox that we're going to use.
Yeah. So I think we have a very big problem. We have an elephant in the room here, and I'm going to ask you guys a question. Do you think you understand blockchain? Do you think you understand what it is? Just raise your hand. It's like 16 people. My hand is down, by the way. I didn't raise my hand. We do not understand the implications of this technology. The key to this tech is to try those ideas out and innovate, right? But let me remind you about one thing again. Bitcoin was created as a response to the 2008 economic crisis. It's all over the place. You can verify that information. And Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous creator of Bitcoin, he didn't give it to a bank. He didn't have this idea of one company creating some sort of IT system that everyone would connect to. And so right now we have a problem that many companies out there just slap the word blockchain on whatever there is. We've created a token for our CTO's beard, for example. It's totally doable. Lame joke, I know. People laugh in at blockchain events. But anyway, you can slap the word blockchain and get away with it because you don't understand the technology, you don't understand what it really is. But the philosophy behind blockchain and behind Bitcoin is remove intermediaries. There is a great article out there that I would recommend anyone here to read. It's called Trusted Third Parties Are Security Holes. And it goes on for several pages about why centralized architecture, centralized topologies aren't good anymore. They cannot scale. Banks cannot scale. Big IT companies cannot scale anymore. We need something truly open, like Linux. That's something that we're trying to create. Are we going to succeed? I don't know. But we have to give it our best shot. So I encourage you, before you trust any company out there, and I've been to presentations where gigantic IT companies they show you circles and squares and they're connected in different ways. And people just say, oh yeah, this is a big trusted company and of course, yeah, it makes sense. We'll go with that blockchain. And then I ask that IT company, who is going to host the nodes of that blockchain for me? And the guy said, well, we're going to do that for you. Well, of course, it goes against the philosophy, the fundamental idea of that. If one company hosts all the nodes of that blockchain and they can change that database anytime they want, this is not a blockchain. At crypto events that I go to, that I speak at, the notion of a private blockchain is a joke. So when we say Vitalik, who is the creator of Ethereum, that he's going to go and work for Ripple, well, that's when people laugh. Again, sorry, but laugh next time. It's a joke. The idea about blockchain, about Bitcoin is, again, it's a combination of all those different ideas. It has to be open. If one company owns a blockchain, well, it's not a blockchain. It's a distributed database. We had distributed computing for decades now. It's not something new. And so again, private blockchains, I'm not saying that they're completely useless. They can be used inside one company for certain things. Like you can use a network inside your company, like an intranet, for your own use, and people from the outside won't be able to access it. That's fine. But was the intranet that technology that changed the world, that got us all here? Well, absolutely not. Of course not. And the key about computers, about internet, about blockchain, that it has to be open. And again, you should not trust me. Again, another idea in the blockchain space is that you should not trust anyone. People will try and sell you all kinds of. Can I swear here? Can I? No. And the key is for you to educate yourself. Read up on all those things. And people may claim mistakes, but making mistakes is a part of learning, right? So go out there, educate yourself. Don't trust anyone. Understand what blockchain is. And then evaluate what other people are trying to sell to you. Education.
So I wanted to give you both an opportunity to respond to that, because that was a pretty strong statement that Max made. It's basically saying that private blockchains are not really blockchains. They're distributed ledgers. It does use the technology, but unless you have a public, permissionless blockchain, you're not playing in this space. What's your reaction to that?
I think my point is, I'm not disagreeing with the point about private and public blockchain Maksim made. I think that would be the first point. The question is always in terms of when you want to make some experiences, where do you want to start? Yeah, and do you want to start somewhere in a kind of this super open environment where you cannot make your own experiences? And therefore, I think it was a very conscious choice to say, well, we're starting with some kind of internal application. So just build up capabilities, building up teams, having discussions inside the companies with partners about the technology. So it's about learning in that sense. I think, I'm not sure if some of the public attempts which we currently see are potentially not too premature. Yeah, and I think when we talk about the element of doing transactions, on the one side, yes, we have the handshake, yes, we have the contract, and then we talk about the flow of money. And I think that's a very important part of it. Yeah, but money, in that sense, has some kind of very important functions. Yeah, and I think we all know that, and especially in travel, we know that. Yeah, in terms of when we need to deal with different kind of currencies. Yeah, one thing is about the stability of the currency. Yeah, so if you're, for example, doing a kind of a contract, and especially this contract is maybe over a year, over 2 years, or it is of a certain volume, if you have some kind of if you have high volatility, yeah, it actually creates a lot of problems. It creates a lot of issues. So therefore, what are we doing, yeah, and what do we need in terms of, what are our requirements towards a kind of a currency in terms of its stability? Yeah, because imagine you have sold to someone to a holiday, he has created or he has changed euro into tokens, and he thought this would be sufficient, yeah, and then after 6 months you say, unfortunately you only have paid half for your holidays. Yeah, or on the other side, the hotelier or maybe the airline thought they got the money in terms of token, but then they found out it's only half the value. Yeah, I think that's a real kind of a problem. So in terms of how do we manage currency? And the second, I think, is we need to have a kind of an, if you want to use currency again, yeah, currencies need to be transactional. Yeah, Bitcoin, you mentioned it, is zero transactional. Yeah, I think the number of bitcoins actually who stay on stock, in that sense, I would say is potentially, I don't know, there's certainly a number there, it's above maybe 90%. Yeah, only a very few of the amount is really moving around, and this is precisely the opposite in terms of how currencies are really used. Yeah, because typically currencies are defined in terms of how fast currencies are, the volume of currencies turned around. So therefore, I think two fundamental principles are currently, I would say, not solved. Yeah, I am positive that we will have solutions going forward. I am absolutely positive, but I'm not sure that the approaches which we have today are actually the right ones in terms of solving these kind of issues. And I think that's, so to speak, I would say, where we are currently looking into, and I think this is something we want to understand, yeah, by moving forward in terms of what is one of the kind of the key elements which I think need to be solved in terms of having a kind of a truly end-to-end transactional network for moving forward. So I think that would be my thought on that kind of topic.
Yeah. Look, from our side, I go a bit, again, as us as a company that needs to do processing transactions, no? So you've shown a graph of how many transactions today platforms, public platforms can transact. So we're discussing about 20 transactions per second. To give a benchmark, today the search of travel in the GDS, we're processing 20,000 transactions per second. So you've seen credit cards at 2,000. We are at 20,000. That's more or less what Google search does. And now that we have NDC coming, we expect that that volume of transactions to multiply by 10 or maybe by 100. So this is, so when we're looking at this kind of scalability, and this is the use of the technology that we're going to do.
Es ist egal, es geht um die Frage, was wir mit der Technologie erreichen wollen. Ob es öffentlich oder privat ist, das hängt davon ab, wie wir das System nutzen wollen, ob wir es für kommerzielle Zwecke nutzen wollen oder ob wir mehr darüber nachdenken, wie wir einen neuen Weg der Kommunikation aufbauen können, den niemand verantwortlich ist für die Infrastruktur.
And if that's the case, it can work, but it
Wenn
will
das
have
der
to
Fall ist,
be,
kann es natürlich
that technology will have to be
Aber
as good
das
to replace
ist vielleicht notwendig, Technologie
private
zu
environment that we're
ersetzen.
talking about, that is high performing, that you have people paying in, that they want some level of guarantees and liabilities.
Dem sind dann auch gewisse
So I have a
Garantien
challenge
notwendig.
for you all.
Ich habe
We have about a minute left.
Herausforderung
Can
für alle.
you
Wir haben
just
noch eine
say
Minute.
one thing
Können Sie
very
nur
briefly,
eine
which
Sache
everyone in
nennen,
this audience should
die
be a takeaway? What they
alle
should remember
mitnehmen
from
sollten
this
hier aus dem
session
Publikum? Was
and take
sollten
back to
Sie
their jobs?
mit
I'll
zurück
let you start
in
this
Ihre
time.
Arbeitswelt
So I
nehmen?
feel, as an example of blockchain, I think the
Als
element of
Beispiel der
identity,
Blockchain denke
which
ich, dass
shouldn't
die
belong to anyone, that
Identität
should be there, you controlling
nicht
your own
kontrolliert werden sollte,
identity
dass es
and
etwas
that
Offenes sein
being
sollte und das
used and being able to
sollte
have this
genutzt
universal
werden,
referential for all companies to be looking at. I think this
sodass
would be a
alle
very interesting
Unternehmen
use case
darauf
for blockchain.
zurückgreifen können. Das ist
Frank,
wirklich ein
what would
interessanter
you want them to
Anwendungsfall.
take away from this?
Was wollen Sie, Frank,
Think
dass das
about in
Publikum
terms
mitnimmt?
of,
Ich denke,
let's take the
wir
opportunity
sollten die
to
Gelegenheit
open
am
up
Schopf
the endless
packen
opportunities for
und
travel
unsere
and
Möglichkeiten
give
für
that to
in der Reisebranche
to
wirklich
the travelers. I
ausschöpfen
think
und damit den Reisenden
when we
einen Dienst
utilize the
erweisen.
technology for that kind of
Wenn wir
purpose,
die
I think
Technologie
we're
dafür
going in the right
nutzen,
direction.
dann gehen wir in die richtige
Max, you have
Richtung.
the last word.
Educate
Das
yourself.
letzte
Don't
Wort.
let other people fool you.
Bilden Sie sich weiter,
Straight up,
lassen Sie sich
go
nicht von
read
anderen
the Bitcoin
täuschen,
white paper,
lesen Sie einfach das
understand what it's all
Bitcoin
about,
White Paper,
and then
verstehen Sie dann damit,
make your own
was
decision.
Okay.
vor sich geht und treffen Sie Ihre Entscheidung. Vielen Dank.